Good morning. It's 3 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Strange days, strange times. I'm glad that no senior Tories come on this programme because given the proper questioning that they are always exposed to on their annual tour of local radio studios, if I had access to Home Secretaries or Prime Ministers or Cabinet Ministers or any of that, I'd be profoundly embarrassed, possibly even humiliated today by the ease with which people at BBC Cambridge and BBC Manchester managed to actually speak a tiny bit of truth to power and hold these jokers to account. And speaking of jokers, it's a mad election, isn't it? It could still be, it's probably still a year away, although whispers are growing that the cynical nature of politicking at the moment suggests it may be sooner rather than later. If you could apply the laws of logic, the most basic laws of logic to Suella Braverman, but of course you can't, that is the definition of unhinged, you would think she thinks there's going to be a snap election, quite a snappish election, a snappier election than the general consensus allows, because she is so clearly already campaigning for the leadership battle that would follow a Conservative defeat. So, you could look at her disgusting outbursts this week. And we'll talk a little later about how she's made the Mail on Sunday, the first newspaper in history, compelled to apologise for an article written by a cabinet minister. Now, here's a little prediction for you. If you find yourself routinely reading or tuning into client journalists, you probably haven't heard about that story. The Mail on Sunday becoming the first newspaper in British history to apologise for an arguably racist lie told by the actual Home Secretary. More on that a little bit later in the programme. But I mentioned the sort of looming election for the very simple reason that you would struggle now to tell me on what platforms the Tories are going to fight. Now, you wouldn't, I don't think, be able to construct a PhD thesis on what platforms Labour are going to fight the next election. But in terms of promises or policies to make your life better, what do you think the Tories can do? Yeah. I have to interrupt those silences, otherwise the emergency tape kicks in and you start listening to an episode of my Full Disclosure podcast. But I'm never entirely sure just how much silence I can get away with. There have been times when you've heard Keith in my ear go, "Speak! Speak! Say something!" Because the silence is stretching out to such a degree that the emergency tape is about to kick in. But what would they fight it on? Now, that fella who is very emblematic, really, of just how desperate the Tory situation has become, 30p Lee Anderson, or Leenock, I'm told, to his mates, he has given the game away, actually, whether he was too thick to realise that you're not supposed to say that stuff out loud, or whether it is just an incapability of conceiving anything more complicated. He essentially said it's going to be culture wars and transgender arguments. That's all we've got. That's all we've got to fight the next election on. Partly because Jeremy Corbyn was the main reason why people who shifted their vote from Labour to Conservative in 2019, he's gone. Tory attempts to somehow nail Keir Starmer to Jeremy Corbyn's shrinking mast are not succeeding. They're not. Doesn't mean they won't succeed when we get nearer to the time, but they are not succeeding. And Brexit has been done, and so has the country, eh? Really? That's the ultimate irony of Brexit. It got done, and so did you. And most people, or a growing number of people now, are ready to admit that. So they can't even campaign on that. I think they'd even struggle, and it wouldn't be a proper policy, pledging to improve your life. I think they'd even struggle to campaign on don't vote Labour because they'll reverse Brexit. Probably quite a lot of waverers would go, "Oh, that's good. Then they've got my vote." So they can't campaign. They can't campaign on any of the issues that they won in 2019 on. And if the numbers don't really support this, but outside the Westminster bubble, but inside the Westminster bubble, there is still a profound belief that Boris Johnson was possessed of some sort of electoral Viagra that reached parts other politicians could not reach. The electorate don't confirm that, but pretty much every right-wing commentator in the country remains convinced of it. But he's not there either, so you're not going to be able to have any Boris Johnson-flavoured vavavoom entering into the conversation either. So what the hell are they going to do? The maddest thing about Tory politics for the last 10 years or so is the shovel loads of cash that they have I think they're all Australian as well, which makes it even funnier. The shovel loads, barrow loads of cash that they have shipped to so-called advisors, whose only job really is to come up with what they call wedge issues, something which will be divided on. What a coincidence that a survey appears today suggesting that we're now a little bit more concerned about immigration than we were last year. Still less concerned about immigration than we are about, say, the economy or the health service. But just you wait until the newspapers start turning up the heat again, and old Nige, creepy Uncle Nige, gets down to Dover with his Fisher-Price binoculars and starts taking his weird little selfies again with desperate refugees in the background. You know, as that dial gets turned up, so will public interest or public concern about immigration. There's a story we'll get on to later about 1 million British children either sleeping on the floor or sharing a bed with a sibling, often a considerably older sibling. 1 million British children who haven't got a bed of their own. But hey-ho, let's get cross about 20 mile per hour speed limits being introduced into areas where people are more likely to be crossing the road. I digress slightly, but I don't, because that 20 mile per hour speed limit is a wedge issue. Sunak today reported he's going to come out. Daily Mail, always the place to go to when you want to find out how the manipulations are proceeding. Sunak's fight back in war on motorists. So, sitting around a table somewhere in SW1, they've decided that this is a wedge issue. I think the Uxbridge and Ruislip by-election probably helped, because although the Tories hemorrhaged votes in Uxbridge and Ruislip, they clung on to the seat by their fingertips, and the main reason for that was largely misinformation and propaganda masquerading as journalism being undertaken by various right-wing commentators and pundits, people believing that ULEZ was going to hurt them financially when it wasn't. Not saying it won't hurt anybody, but it won't hurt anything like the number of people that voted against it because they thought it was going to hurt them. So the Tories think, well, we can tell lies about motoring. That seems to work with the mugs that we conned with Brexit. And that there is the question that every Conservative activist and campaigner and politician is asking them. What's going to work? What lies will work on the mugs who fell for Brexit? That's our only chance of getting back into power in 2024. We need to find a new load of lies to tell the people who we managed to con to vote against their own interests and to become the first country in the history of the world to impose economic sanctions on itself. And the contempt with which they and their friends in think tanks and newspapers must hold you, if you're in that category, should really prompt you to give your head a wobble. They despise you. They simultaneously despise you and find you hilarious. You did what? You persuaded people to actually vote to lose their own job. Yep, we did it. We got it. We got over the line. But hey ho, trebles all round for the lads and the people who fund our think tanks. They're delighted with it all. They think they're going to be able to wash away workers' protections and health and safety legislation. We can have poisons. We've got poisons now that you can't buy in the European Union, but you can pour them all over the UK. It's getting fantastic. Looking good. So that's how it works. So those are the plans. That is the plan. The very simple search for wedges. And they can't really find any, apart from the war on motorists, or in Suella Braverman's case, the war on the multiculturalism that has allowed people of her background to rise to the very top of British politics. Down with that sort of thing, she says, leaving Rishi Sunak too frightened to say, shut up. Don't be so stupid and disgusting. It's obvious that we live in a country where diversity and multiculturalism have succeeded. It's a work in progress, but our very existence in these very jobs is evidence of how successful it has been. So that can't work either. 12 minutes after 10 is the time. And then Labour gives them the occasional bone which they can't wait to start gnawing. And that is the 20% on private school fees, the potential increase of 20% on private school fees, the VAT being applicable now to purchases that parents make that is not currently applicable. So there's VAT on everything else that you buy with a relatively small number of exemptions. But if you're buying education for your children at the moment, you don't pay we don't pay VAT on it. And it's a fascinating political gambit, this. I don't really today want to talk about your personal relationship with the issue. We talked about that a lot earlier in the week, and there are really, 4 or 5 categories of people, aren't there? So you've got the people who are going to be affected by it and are going to be able to pay it quite comfortably, people who are going to be affected by it and are not going to be able to pay it quite comfortably, but will probably be okay, or they'll just not be okay. I put you in the same category. People who think that it is actually natural justice at work, it's proper politics, it's redistribution of wealth, it's reducing advantage, it's increasing fairness and equality. And then you've got people who think, well, it's got nothing to do with me. It's got absolutely nothing to do with me. So that's where the question of whether or not the politics will work kicks in. So there are attempts to claim that Labour have done some sort of flip-flop or reverse. They haven't. They've just come to a slightly better understanding of charity loopholes which abound in tax law and law in general. And there may still be another loophole that allows some schools to avoid imposing VAT on school fees. But the simple political proposal is that the 7% of children in this country who attend private school, by that you shave off bursaries and scholarships, but the large majority of them who have their fees paid by family members or sponsors or friends are going to have VAT applied to their school fees. Now, the wedge, the advice from the highly paid activists or advisors is that we should turn this into a class war. You can tell I'm in one of those moods. I promise I'll take calls at some point, but I'm not in a position to say exactly when, because I've got an anecdote to share with you that I don't think I've shared before. They want to turn it into a class war. My question for you is it going to work? So really, I want to hear from people, parents or non-parents, who will never send their children to private school. Okay, so it might be because your children are 48, or it might be because you are, unless short of getting a lucky scratch card or winning the lottery, you're simply never going to be in the financial universe where you've got 15 grand minimum or 50 grand maximum left after tax to spend on your children's education, or you would be politically opposed to it, although in that case I can probably predict what your position would be on this story. I want to talk about the politics of it, and indeed the politics of class war. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need to tell me what you think of this policy. And I really want to hear from you if you don't like it, despite the fact that it's never going to affect you. I want to hear from you if you do like it, despite the fact that it's never going to affect you. But the where are we? The notion that it is actually going to swing your needle, it's going to nudge your political needle, despite the fact that it doesn't affect you, is probably the most interesting psephological element of the looming election, because most of us are not going to be affected, positively or negatively, by the wedge issues that the Tories are going to be determined to debate on. You know, you can probably make a case that reducing a speed limit in a highly built-up residential area from 30 miles an hour to 20 miles an hour is going to have a huge impact on my life. It's only going to have positive impacts, apart from making you a bit late for work or a bit late for school or something like that. The calculation is that Labour is going to make various promises to change your life, and the Tories are going to make various attempts to turn you against policies that are not going to change your life. And the truth lies somewhere between the two of them. Okay, so what do you think of this policy? 0345 6060 973. What do you think of a policy that essentially seeks to recognise that you shouldn't get any form of tax exemption on payments made to award your children advantages denied to 93% of the nation's children? What do you think of the politics here? 0345 6060 973. And then after the junction and before the calls start, I will share with you my personal, very odd and slightly traumatic experience of class war. I was a teenage victim of class war in circumstances that still make me slightly uncomfortable, because I thought I was on the other side of the class war. And an experience in the Museum Gardens in York in about 1989 made me realise that actually, for anyone watching from the outside, I was on the other side of the class war. 18 minutes after 10 is the time. So that's the question. You, as a voter, are not going to cast your vote according to Labour's school fees policy unless you are currently paying school fees and really, really, really resent, fear, or object to the idea of having to pay more, but for people who will not be directly affected by it, either through choice or circumstance, what do you think of the politics? The politics. 0345 6060 973. It's 10:18. 22 minutes after 10. I will, by popular demand, postpone my class 4 experience and share it with you a little later and get some phone calls on the board first. I can't. I don't know. I don't know that I've ever really nailed the art of a phone-in designed to map political opinion solely rather than experience. So is putting VAT on school fees going to change your vote? You can tell me that. Is it going to make any difference to the bigger numbers, to the metrics, to the bigger picture? I don't know that we can ever really do that in a phone-in, because unlike opinion pollsters, we can't select, We can't have a cultivated or a curated sample. I can only speak to the people that call me. And even if everyone says X, then it might be that there's more people listening who think Y. 22 after 10 is the time. The phone lines are open. And if you're not going to be personally affected by a VAT imposition on school fees, I want to hear what you think of it politically, ethically, philosophically, personally. Henry's in Mitcham to kick things off. Henry, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello, Henry.
We're very fortunate that we do probably have enough money to send our kids private, but we looked around a state school last night and have decided to send them to state. Quite a few of our friends are sending their kids to private school. I mean, the state school is extremely good, so that perhaps affects things slightly.
Yes,
so
definitely.
If you live in an area where you don't have a good state school, then that might influence. But we do have a good state school, and they're still sending them to private. Obviously, the VAT, there probably are some of our friends that are on the cusp of being able to afford it with that increase. I'm of the personal opinion that I don't think private schools should exist, because I don't think that essentially until if you ban private schools and public schools, then there would be an impetus to improve state schools, and until that happens, there is no drive for the people in power or the people with the money to improve state schools, because obviously you send your children, obviously there are people with different needs, and I accept that, but ultimately you do send your children to private school to gain an advantage over state schools. Now, I'm speaking as my wife went to private school, lots of my friends went to private school.
Yes.
I didn't, so I see it from both sides.
Well, I think you probably see it a little bit more clearly, because I, with all my lefty credentials, as someone who is both a parent of and a benefit of private education, I balk at that bit that you said, the idea that you can't govern honestly on education issues if your children are not going through the education system that the massive majority of the electorate go through. But I think you're right. It's an emotional response. I kind of respond to you saying that by going, "Oh, don't be silly. That's like saying you can't care about the poor unless you're rich." But if your children aren't in that system, and you are in charge of that system, you're surely going to engage with things differently from how you would engage if they were in it.
Absolutely. If let's say Jacob Rees-Mogg's children went to state school, there is no doubt there would be an impetus to improve state schools and up the funding. They would not be short of pencils and paper and other materials.
Feeding children in the mornings or
absolutely. So, until that happens, I admit it's quite black and white.
Yeah.
But essentially that is the case. I mean, I looked around private schools and the state school, and obviously the big difference is class sizes. And it blew my mind, really, that even in the lower years, that there are, say, 8 to 10 children per class. I mean, obviously, they're going to have a far better experience. Having said that, they'll have a better learning experience. They'll concentrate more. I mean, my state school was particularly awful.
Was it?
It wasn't horrendous, but, the behaviour was not there. The attention was not there. But it's not just that. I tried to explain to my wife, who is a doctor, lots of our friends are doctors, that when I went for careers advice, they essentially asked me which local factory I wanted to work in, which at the time I wasn't in the slightest driven. But when I met my wife, I was meeting doctors, solicitors, all these kind of professionals, And it was never really even talked about in our school that you could even do that. So the actual, it's so different. I mean, so I don't, in terms of the VAT, going back to the VAT thing, is it a bad thing? Yes, but I kind of, does it really matter? I don't know. Will it dramatically affect? Obviously, it affects some people in the middle that are scraping together, but intrinsically, it won't change the overall position. The rich people will still, send their rich people. I mean, I heard something this morning about someone I think it was television that are saying, if you pay all your fees up front, then you can escape the VAT thing. Well, obviously, people scraping together, again, that only helps the very rich.
Yes.
The people scraping together are not going to be able to pay it in one lump sum.
But that's where the politics might work. If you need to ignore the numbers because they will be close to negligible. But the people who really will be squeezed out by it, while, as you remind us, people who've got capital, people who've got a lot of wealth, as ever, actually get a cheaper deal on everything than people who are less well off because they can just stick the whole lot in up front. Do you think, and in the circles you move, you're very, very well placed to answer this question, do you think it's going to have political salience for people not directly squeezed out of the game, people who either have to save a little bit more to keep their children in these schools, or people like you really who aren't going to send your children to these schools at all, but could do if you were so minded?
I think politically we're in a strange situation obviously, but most of my friends would definitely not vote Conservative,
right?
But it may possibly sway them to vote Lib Dem or something like that, although they're obviously making noise about possibly going even further in certain ways. So it may make them think again, but they certainly wouldn't vote Conservative.
Whatever the weather, and however loud and violent the attempts to turn this into a class war issue. Henry, that's a perfect opening call because you're both inside the story and outside observing it, which I suppose in a sense I am, but from the other side of the fee-paying fence. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need to nail the politics of it, which Henry just introduced at the end perfectly. I mean, we're living in an era where however loud the newspapers shout, with the exception still of immigration, they don't change the game anywhere near as much as they thought that anywhere near as much as they used to, and as much as some of them still believe that they do. So when you read about the Tories, Rishi Sunak later today, I probably should have mentioned this sooner, is going to accuse Labour of waging a class war. So think of the people involved. Rishi Sunak, one of the richest men in the world, is accusing Keir Starmer, who his working class credentials, if you care about such things, are impeccable. His mother worked in the NHS, his wife worked in the NHS. His career was spent in public service as a lawyer, and he grew up understanding what a shortage of cash looked like. He is going to accuse Keir Starmer of a class war, of waging class war. One of the richest men in the world accusing Keir Starmer of waging, son of a toolmaker, of waging class war. Is it going to work? I'd like to say, are you going to fall for it? But I guess that brings my prejudices too far to the fore. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. 0345 6060 973. It's 10:30. 10:34 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Here's a little slice of Sunak. As I mentioned to you, it falls to the BBC's regional reporters and, of course, Global's regional reporters as well, to go to places where, oddly, studio-based London broadcasters rarely seem to manage to reach when they're interviewing senior members of government, i.e. ask them some difficult or some important questions. And this is the political editor of BBC South, Peter Henley, talking to Rishi Sunak yesterday about this school fees issue that we're discussing now.
So what do you think of Labour trying to make it more expensive?
Labour's approach to that just illustrates that they don't understand the aspirations of families like my parents, who are working really hard. They wanted to do something for their kids that they thought would make a difference to them. And I think Labour's approach to that is to clamp down on it, right? They don't understand the aspiration that people have to try and provide a better life for their kids, and they want to punish them for that as some part of some class war. I don't think that's right. You know, my family emigrated to this country. They didn't have an enormous amount, but they worked really hard. They integrated, and they just wanted to give their kids everything they could. I think that's quite a natural instinct that many families will feel, and I want to make sure that my government, my party, is on the side of people like that, because that's how I was raised and those are my values.
Is it going to work? Is it going to wash as a class war? John's in Edinburgh. John, what do you think?
Well, I don't. Yeah, so it's a bit of a strange interest I have because I don't think our kids will be going to private school. So
Right.
We've got 3 kids. But if you go back to the start, the way I come at it is education. Private education is as old as the hills. There's
Yes.
always been teachers and of all sorts over the ages. State education, compulsory state education, is a relatively new thing.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden-
Historically speaking, I mean, not in sort of living memory terms.
Yeah. But what I don't understand is why people think. So even though I can't, I'm not going to be part of that system. What right does the state have to take away or interfere in the private education? And I think paying.
Well, that's a question about what right the state has to impose taxes, mate.
Yeah, I don't see. Yeah,
You're paying VAT on your breakfast.
Yeah, I think though taking away some of the burden for educating children from the state and doing it privately.
They're providing education for every child in the country, whether parents choose to take it up or not. I could be wrong, but I don't think this has got the libertarian flavour to it that you're pursuing.
So my problem
here is free full-time education for your child from year 1 to year 13. Here it is, right? Oh, okay. I don't want that. I'm going to spend a ton of money on getting them a better deal, a better advantage than the 93% of children in the state system. It's okay, that's fine, you carry on. But obviously, if I'm putting VAT on your breakfast, I'm going to have to put VAT on that as well. That's how I see it. Doesn't mean it's the right way or the only way to see it, but it seems pretty clear to me that that's what's going on.
You don't pay VAT on children's shoes, do you? So, there's different things that you can do.
Nobody pays VAT on children's shoes, but you don't get free shoes from the public purse for every child in the country from year 1 to year 13. So I don't know that shoes play a role in any comparisons here.
Well, okay, back to the education thing.
Yeah.
I don't think pulling some people down helps pull others up. I don't buy that, and I think that the government, it's like people how much do you really care about the poor or how much do you hate the rich? And I think it's a jealousy. I think that's what they're playing into this political policy from Labour. It's more about. Well, then I'm
the perfect counter to that because I'm paying it and I'll be hit with the extra 20%. So I can't be jealous of myself, can I? But I think it's a move towards a fairer society.
I don't think you're a typical voter. I know a lot of people.
Well, I can only tell you where I'm coming from. The fewer people that have an education like mine, the better. I beg your pardon. The fewer people that have the paid-for privilege of an education like mine, the more likely you are to see an education like mine spread further around the country, and that would be for the general good.
It'd be good, yeah, and it's great. And like I said, I know people went to private school. I don't see how charging extra tax on that is going to help the state sector. I don't
it's
see
it. It's £1.5 billion, about 6,000 teachers, they reckon.
I think it's the politics of kind of grievance.
Okay, and you can keep saying that, and I can keep giving you evidence why it isn't. Not just personal.
It's not evidence, though. It's your opinion.
Well, no, it's not.
It's your opinion versus my opinion. I don't think
it's not. It's not. I mean, you're saying that my position is based on envy, and I'm pointing out it can't be because I'm in the category of people that are going to be affected by it.
I didn't say your position was based on envy.
Everybody else who thinks like I think is based on envy.
No, I'm talking about my life and people that I know who are against private education, and it's basically because they dislike the wealthier, people with more money. Yeah. And I'm not in that category. I'm not in that category.
I have to take your word for that. But obviously, if you put VAT on private education, they're still going to be wealthy. But I guess you have to explain that to your friends.
It'll be more elitist. It'll become more elitist. It'll do the reverse of what they want to achieve.
That's the problem. Abolish it altogether or nibble at the edges. In philosophical and ethical terms, it's better for the community to nibble at the edges. But I suspect that in terms of genuine equality and genuine fairness, it would be better to get rid of the whole thing. No Labour government's going to do that. Although in my lifetime, I sense I'm older than you, in my lifetime it was actually Labour policy. I had the remarkable experience of sitting in A-level politics class at one of the most prestigious public schools in the country next to a lad whose auntie was a Labour Education Secretary of State pledging to abolish private schools. It was a much more complicated family situation than that little vignette allows. But it was policy. It was for a very, very long time something that Labour pushed hard for, but that ship sailed. I think it sailed with Tony Blair, who of course was educated at a public school just down the road from where you are in Edinburgh. 10:40 is the time. Alan is in Bristol. Alan, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi. Hello. Hi, James. about 11, 12 years ago, I was working in a very prestigious private boarding school in Surrey, where the fees were more than my take-home pay, for one student.
What was that like? What was that? I mean, I think John has a point. I was probably a bit dismissive of it about some of this being motivated by resentment or envy. What was it like to know that you were getting paid less for a year than those children's parents were paying to send them to the place where you were?
Well, but the kids themselves were fantastic, and it was a very, very easy place to work, in small classes and well-behaved students, and it was an absolute joy to work there. Any contact with parents, I hated that. Parents' evenings and parents getting in touch. Why is my child only achieving a C? We're paying you lots of money. And you were. So the parents, I didn't like the parents, and 95% plus of them, I would say, were in finance of some kind. They were, society's takers. But anyway, I'll just tell you my little story.
Yeah, please.
We had, I'm not sure when this was, if it was the last Labour government or the new Tory government, because it would have been around about 2010. I was there 2009 to 2012. And there was something being imposed, taking away charitable status from private schools. Is that right?
Yeah, but I think that's wobbled as a consequence of charity loopholes and the fact that it. I don't know the full details, but the headline is the VAT. The charitable status has been abandoned.
Yeah. I remember that. So the chairman of governors got up, and all the other board of governors were there. They're all in grey suits. They're all bald, and for some reason they all had very shiny heads.
But you see, you are now sounding like a class warrior. You can't object to the fact that they all wore suits, Alan, or had shiny heads.
Well, no, all right, no, it was just interesting. It was comical.
All right, so there's a homogeneity about them.
Yeah. And the chairman of governors stood there and saying, where there's been problems, about fees and VAT. He said, luckily, on the board of governors, most of us are chartered accountants, and we've sat around for hours and hours, and we've managed to find a loophole.
Yes.
So this is just sort of echoing what you're saying, and I've no idea what the loophole was.
One of them is to pay your fees years in advance to escape a VAT charge in the first year of a Labour government. So that's this week's loophole, is that you could avoid it by paying it up front, which is obviously not going to apply to everybody, but it will apply to some.
Yeah, but it was just this horrible cynicism. They're trying to do this to us, but we've beaten them. We're all chartered accountants. We know what we're talking about.
Yes. Well, I think that's how wealth often approaches taxes, and it's one of the best things that they've communicated to people who benefit from tax. People who are net gainers from paying tax have been persuaded that taxes are their enemy, even though they get more out of the pot than they put into it, which is true, I think, of most of the population. It's certainly a hell of a lot more than most people would think if they were asked. And so in a sentence, Alan, the politics of it appeal to you because...
Well, I'm going to sound like a class war again, really.
I said in a sentence. I didn't realise we were going to have so many pauses.
Sorry. All right. Okay. All right. To raise money to go into state schools to bring, to have Rishi Sunak saying, if you pay money, you get a better education. Well, that shouldn't be right.
Shouldn't be the case, no. And you're never going to move towards a world where it's not true until the access to the quotes better education is either non-existent or negligible. Amanda in Berkshire adopts the role of the parent I find most confusing, and I say that respectfully, Amanda, in that you're paying this money and you don't think it's because it gives your children an advantage. She writes, "This makes my blood boil. I thought we lived in a free country. There are multiple reasons to send your child to a private school, not just to give them an advantage, and definitely not just because you are rich, which I am not. And by contrast, why should I writes this text, to be subsidising private education. If a parent can afford $15,000 a term, why can't they afford $18,000? It's not the public's position to pay for something elitist. That's already provided for by the stat. And then tax exempt it on top is clearly ridiculous. Here's a little question to ponder. By the time I come back from this junction, I may have realised it's not quite as clever a question as I thought it was. But how come introducing ULEZ is condemned as a fundraising tactic that is not actually designed to clean air, but is designed to just put cash into the public coffers, as if that's suddenly somehow a bad thing to be doing? So ULEZ is bad because it's a fundraising tactic, and yet putting money on school fees is also bad because it's a fundraising tactic. It's 10:46. It is 10:49, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I think that the Independent Schools Council covers all private schools. So here's the thing. Here's the thing that sorry, I'm being a bit self-indulgent on this, but in terms of why I managed to still find stuff really, really interesting, even if we've talked about it a lot together in the past, partly come up with new ways. That's my job. Come up with new introductions, new ways of thinking about things, new ways of asking the question, but also things that still have the power to shock you. So we are talking about Labour's plans to put VAT on school fees. You currently pay VAT on your trousers, but you don't pay it if you're paying thousands of pounds to buy, as I do, an education for your children that you think is better than what would be available if you weren't paying money. That's what we're talking about, right? The Independent Schools Councils reckoned that there are, beginning of last year, there were 544,316 pupils at these schools. The fees, by the way, have gone up exponentially since I was at public school. The numbers now are staggering. 5% this year, 2% the year before, 6% in 2019. And it hasn't had an appreciable effect on the overall numbers. But so we're talking about, as a nation, as a country, this is what Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer have put into the political mixer, 544,316 pupils, a tiny proportion of whom may be excluded from the education they currently enjoy by the introduction of VAT. Although personally I doubt it. I think it's what economists call an inelastic market, but we'll see. There's some research published elsewhere today which is getting approximately 1% of the attention that the story about these 544,316 children in Britain is getting, that tells us that 1 million children in Britain don't have a bed of their own. They are either sleeping on the floor or sharing a bed with a sibling or another family member. More than 1 million children in the UK either sleep on the floor or share a bed with parents or siblings because their family cannot afford the luxury of replacing broken frames and mouldy linen. And that's come from the children's charity Bernardo's. and that's mad, yeah? And I'm guilty. I'm planning on talking about that later, but 544,316 pupils, a tiny proportion of whom may lose their access to private education in the event of Labour introducing VAT on school fees. Rishi Sunak, Prime Minister, leader of a party that's been in power for 13 years in a country where over 1 million children haven't got a bed of their own. Where's the class war, mate? Where's the class war, Prime Minister? Where's the enemy of aspiration? 10:52 is the time. Rosie is in Melverley, in North Shropshire. Rosie, what would you like to say?
Hi.
Hello.
Lovely to speak to you. Thank you very much for having me on.
You're very welcome.
So I was incredibly lucky to be privately educated, as were my brother and sister, at quite a prestigious boarding school in Derbyshire. My family have all been privately educated, and the class war happened for real for me in my own house when I married a state school teacher.
Oh, yes.
And we had to, we're now expecting our first child, and we've obviously had to have quite a lot of conversations about how we're going to be managing that in the future. And I have had a bit of a personal epiphany in that I think that private school fundamentally is something that it absolutely should be taxed. The fact that it has charitable status is beyond me when I think back to my school life and trying to understand why my school would need to be a charity. It really is. I can't think of anything that we did positively to impact the wider community than ourselves, really, and aren't charities supposed to do good?
That's pretty damning. I mean, there'd be plenty. I can push back a bit against that. I mean, there would have been probably bursaries that you didn't know about, or some scholarships that you didn't know about, and you probably did do some work in the community, even if you didn't register at the time that it had an altruistic bent to it. But the charitable status is actually proving more complicated than the VAT. But the VAT exemption is historically built on charitable status, so they're taking that away. The epiphany is based on what? Based upon your grasp of basic fairness.
I think so. I mean, so for me, two things that I've really kind of observed watching my husband with his kind of career and how he's been teaching and the way that the school system has worked. One thing that I have noticed is that he's taught in two kind of very different schools, one very rural and one quite in a nice town near where we live. And the difference, in funding levels, but B, in kind of parental engagement that the students had and support that was available for the students at the different schools kind of made one school a much more pleasant and high-achieving environment than the other. And I just wonder whether increasing, by adding VAT onto private school fees, would you push some parents that perhaps maybe have a little bit more, have a little bit more time to be extra invested in there, or the resources?
Well, and inclination, because I mean, albeit that we both probably went to school with some people whose parents still subscribe to the Victorian notion that children should be seen and not heard, and they just sort of outsourced all the childcare but for the more aspirational middle class, it is parents who prioritise education above other things that they could have spent the money on, and I think, like you, I think bringing those parents into the state sector is a win-win.
Definitely. I think even just from seeing the difference in the kind of the PTAs at the two schools between the school in the state school in the nicer area where where the mums maybe weren't working, or they had additional resources to provide, to organise things like extra bake sales and all
just
the
buy a
amazing
minibus
things that
so they can go on school trips, fundraising, all that kind of thing. Do you think? I mean, so you're in an interesting and quite specific cohort. Do you think, as an overview, Rosie, do you think it's politically salient, this? Do you think this is going to nudge many people's needles?
I don't see how it couldn't, really, because I think, you said earlier that 7% of children are privately educated. So the rest of the 93 of us are all going, well, yeah, fair enough.
Well, there's another category that we missed, actually, that Tracy's been in touch to remind us of. She says that what about people that do use independent schools and will be scuppered by the plan but still support it, which is where I sit, writes Tracy. I don't think Sunak can turn this into Labour not understanding hard-working people and aspiration. Surely hard-working people that can't pay for it will just feel insulted, which plays into what Rosie was saying. It'd be interesting. I mean, they are desperate for wedge issues, and that's why today you're hearing about a war on aspirational middle classes and a war on motorists. Rishi Sunak casting himself as the hero you didn't know you needed to protect you from these class warriors and these people waging wars on cars. I just find it a bit daft, frankly, but that doesn't mean it won't work. This, after all, is the land of Brexit. Thank you, Rosie. Christopher is in Wandsworth. Christopher, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello.
Thank you. I was last night in a school in my area, very deprived school, but a very good school in the sense they're doing great work. And I was there speaking to some of the pupils about what I do. I do work in the media. And the headmaster at the end said to me, the thing is, for the vast majority of the pupils, they don't have any access to anyone who's in a quote-unquote middle-class profession, say the media, say the top jobs. And I think that I think hits at the heart of this discussion. If you go to the independent school, I went to an independent school, is that access to those elite roles, those elite jobs that seem to be cut off for people at the other end. And I just think you
can't be what you can't see, which is often applied in race conversations. But obviously, as with almost all issues that apply to race, it actually applies to socioeconomic status at least as much.
Yes, I just think it's gone too far, the inequality. You're always going to have some inequality, but it's just gone too far, as you made the point about 1 million children not able to have a bed to sleep in. There's got to be some kind of investment in the state system.
After 13 years of austerity, which was neither necessary nor particularly well explained.
Well, if you're at Eton College, you're going to have £50,000 spent on your education. If you're at the same comprehensive nearby, it's going to be 7,000.
Is that right? I'd have to trust you on that.
Well, I mean, I think it's around 7,000
Sure.
that's income from the government. But I think that the other thing, obviously, is what happens at the top universities. There has to be a kind of move, I think that is happening, that you kind of handicap it so that if you have done very well at a school that is at the poorer end, that you kind of, that is...
No, I think you put it very well, and from a very personal perspective. And oddly, I don't know why, but while you were talking, my brain went off in a slightly different direction with regard to Rishi Sunak, who I think is worth about £750 million in conjunction with his wife. Because if you want to say, well, I'm very worried that Labour is attacking the aspirational parents, aspirational, hard-working parents, you say you're absolutely right. Let's leave VAT then on private schools, and let's bring in a massive asset tax on people with personal wealth of more than, say, £100 million. Because that's not going to curtail your existence. Let's just tax you 50% on all your assets straight away, get the country back on its feet, and then we can go back to pursuing epic and unnecessary wealth on an industrial scale. So you presumably be comfortable with that, Rishi, would you? No? That's odd. You'd be telling us next that you want to get rid of inheritance tax, despite the fact it only benefits people like you. 4 minutes after 11 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Gary, my mate Gary, listens to the show while he's decorating. So he's an artisan. I don't know if you follow him on Twitter, the official GRB. Some of the work that he does in the field of decorating is mesmeric. Taking off about 200 years worth of paint from some cornicing was like watching, those weird things you hear about on YouTube, people watching other people open presents or something like that, unboxings. It's just mad, isn't it? The stuff that's been discovered through technology to be strangely compelling. He does some amazing stuff and gives you advice and stuff like that. But I know him very well. He's a pal of mine. Started off as a listener to the programme, but he's become a mate. And he listens to the programme more carefully than I do, which is odd given that I'm speaking, whereas he's just up a ladder with his headphones in. And he says, you forgot the hook and tease. I'm like, I didn't forget the hook. What hook and tease did I forget? I haven't forgot. And I did forget a hook and tease. I didn't tell you my class war story. And now we've moved on to another conversation. So I will have to endeavour to find a moment in the programme to tell you that story later, because I don't want to distract from the subject that we're talking about next. And I don't know for whose benefit I do the bit I'm about to do, whether I do it for your benefit or mine. When I talk to you about how this works, this bizarre relationship that we have together, the mornings that we spend together, and why some conversations go in different directions from others. So I feel guilty about the fact that I am much more drawn professionally to the story about the 500,000 children in private schools than I am to the over 1 million children not in their own beds. Now, the reason why that happens is because it's potentially, I don't know whether it's a better phone-in, but it is an easier phone-in, because there is automatically tension and polarity in place. You can, and some days we choose not to do it in that way, but other days we revel in it. We relish the fisticuffs, the toing and froing. Here is somebody insisting that it's perfectly reasonable for them to get government help on buying educational advantages for their children, and here is someone to describe it as outrageous. Whereas when I tell you about 1 million children in the UK either sleeping on the floor or sharing a bed with parents or siblings because they can't afford the, quotes, luxury, end quotes, of replacing broken frames and mouldy linen, you probably feel, as I do, a temptation to turn away, a temptation to look away. You don't. I mean, it's certainly going to be very difficult to turn it into a two-sided brouhaha, isn't it? Well, here is, I mean, I know that television stations exist, and albeit that they're having some local difficulties at the moment, where they genuinely would try to argue, and they'd bring on some old dinosaur to claim, or some desperate attention-seeking youthful loser to claim that it's perfect, it's all the parents' fault. Actually, they'd get Lee Anderson to do it. They'd get the Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party to come on and say, well, the only reason kids are sleeping on floors is because their parents have turned the beds into go-karts or something. I don't know what passes for... And he's not alone. You've got that Brendan Clark-Smith fella as well. You've got Jonathan Gullis. And then you've got the other ones. Do you remember the one who said, do you know... I know some people are struggling with the cost of living at the moment. Do you know that supermarkets have value ranges? Did you know this? You can go into a supermarket and they have got beans that are cheaper than Heinz. Heinz? They're cheaper than Heinz. So you must buy, if you're poor and you are struggling to pay your bills, we, the Conservative Party who've created this economic situation and presided over the proliferation of food banks, we have your interests at heart. Therefore, as your local MP, I am here to tell you there are value ranges. Value ranges. Is that what they're called, Tristram? Have I got that right? Yes, boss. Value ranges in your local supermarket. It's incredible, isn't it? So I'm sure you could find a Tory to come along and tell you that the only reason why children are sharing beds with their siblings or sleeping on the floor, sleeping on mattresses on the floor, is because of lifestyle choices made by their feckless work-shy parents who spend all their money on flat-screen televisions and... What's the 2023 flat-screen TV? Is it vaping? What's the 2023? So when once someone behind this microphone who performatively hated poor people would claim that the only reason why people were struggling was because all the money was being spent on flat screen TVs. What is it in 2023? Have we got anything? Send your ideas in on a postcard, please, to 84850 or tweet at Mr. James W. What's the 2023 equivalent of flat screen TVs? I mean, it was nonsense when they pulled it out. It's just a desperate attempt to pretend that there's no such thing as poverty in this country, and the people you really need to worry about are not the people using food banks, but the people who are going to have to pay VAT on their children's school fees. That right there, for me, is the essence of political discourse in Brexit Britain. You have got about 80% of the media and all of the governing party more concerned, ostensibly more concerned, about VAT being introduced on school fees, which is going to have a meaningful effect upon an almost negligible number of people, than they are about food banks, warm banks, hungry families, and, in this case, bedless children. Who do you feel more sympathy for? The parent moaning about having to find a few more quid to pay school fees, or the parent who can't actually tuck their child into bed at night because there's no bed? And hey-ho, here's a job for you. Netflix, isn't it? Netflix. It's all about Netflix, not flat-screen TVs. So they're probably spending all their money on Netflix. That's why they can't afford a bed for their children. Or, of course, you remind me, avocados. Thank you, Aidan. Avocados and Netflix. They're spending all that. So that's the new flat-screen TV. Is that deflation or inflation? You think of a flat-screen TV. It was when it first started being used by liars and poverty deniers, it was still quite an enviable thing. I didn't have a flat-screen TV when poverty deniers and liars in the media started telling me that everybody on benefits did. I didn't actually have one. Netflix is a bit more achievable, isn't it? So that's quite sad, actually, that the kind of criteria for performatively hating poor people has probably come down a bit. Netflix and avocados. I've stopped saying, I hope you've noticed, I've stopped saying avocado pears. Do you know why I've stopped saying avocado pears? Because I was the only person left in the United Kingdom that called them avocado pears. I had to even check that they were once called avocado pears, because every time I called them an avocado pear, everybody laughed at me. You laughed at me, my inbox exploded with people laughing at me, and my own colleagues who were supposed to be there to boost me and make me feel confident and bouncy before coming on air in the morning, my own colleagues laughed at me when I said avocado pears. They were called avocado pears in the 1970s. They were a staple of Weight Watchers, I believe. Avocado pears and melons. My mum must have been on a diet once that involved avocado pears and melons, because I've got some sort of weird childhood memory of it. I used to make necklaces out of the melon seeds. Did you do that? So you get a needle, right? And you thread it with cotton. You dry the melon seeds, for God's sake. Otherwise, you're going to have all sorts of flies buzzing around your neck. You dry them out, clean them, dry them out, and then you thread a needle through each individual melon seed. And you can make a beautiful necklace or even a bracelet if you're feeling a bit lazy. There you go. So I'm doing that thing where I'm trying to cheer you up, make you smile, keep you on board, because we're about to talk about something horrible. That's what I'm doing. That's why I lean more heavily into the conversation about private school fees, because I'm not getting my violin out for you, than I do into the conversation about children with no beds, because it makes me want to cry. And there it is. So what is a better story for the purposes of the time that we spend together every day? Private schools are a better story than bedless children. Why? Because it makes you want to cry as well. 12 minutes after 11 is the time. Bernardo's, the children's charity, says that increasing bed poverty reflects growing levels of destitution. Can you get the Daily Mail on line 2? I'm going to offer them an article about why there's no such thing as bed poverty. It doesn't exist at all. And for the next day's paper, I'll do a piece about, won't someone think of the private school parents having to pay VAT? Bed, no such thing as bed poverty. If you can't afford a bed for your children altogether now, you shouldn't have had them in the first place. There it is. A complete denial of the vicissitudes of modern life, or the fact that people who consider themselves to be haves can become have-nots in the blink of an eye or the flick of a finger. So that's why we don't do it. But we're doing it today. The charity says that increasing bed poverty reflects growing levels of destitution in which low-income families already struggling with food and gas bills often find they are unable to afford a comfortable night's sleep either. And I'll tell you for nothing, that makes everything worse. Any teacher will tell you that a tired child is a troubled child. A hungry child is a troubled child, and a tired child is a troubled child, and a hungry, tired child is not going to do as well at school that day as they would do if they were neither tired nor hungry. It's breathtaking. So about 700,000 children now sharing beds, while 444,000 are estimated to sleep on the floor, leaving them tired, anxious, and finding it hard to concentrate at school. I can't imagine you would want to jump in and phone me with the experience of what it's like, but I would be very grateful if you could share it. We will, of course, ring you straight back. We always do. But just give me the why of it, if you could. Give me the detail, because the headline is striking. The headline is stark. The detail is probably quite ordinary. So you know that the food bank, if you go to a food bank either as a donor or a volunteer or a user, and quite a lot of users are volunteers, you know. I think that is, I don't know, yesterday we had a conversation about what it means to be proud of the country that you grew up in, but that something makes me feel quite what the word is, admiration. Users become volunteers in food banks, but you will always be told that it's not just food, and that basic essentials like shampoo and soap, these are crucial constituents, non-perishable, ambient goods, I think they're called. You can wash the kids' clothes, wash the kids, wash yourself, wash your hair. All of that is of a great need in food banks. So if people can't afford little things, we always talk about the boiler, don't we? What happens if the boiler breaks? So you're running out of money at the end of the month. Remember that 40-odd% of people on universal credit are in work, so we can't do the lazy Daily Mail, they're all unemployed, feckless work-shy labour. It's a hell of a lot of people not in work. Almost everybody not in work doesn't deserve to be characterised like that either. But it's not just the boiler, is it? It's not just the boiler or the car. What if the wheel falls off the car? What if the boiler fails? You need a new boiler. That's an sort of outlay you can't even begin to imagine. But what if it is? Yeah, what if it's just a bed? You ever broken a bed? Stop it, matron. I don't want those sort of stories. This is a family program. You've ever broken a bed? I broke a bed once when I was a student. I had it propped up on books, I think. But that was suboptimal because, well, I won't spare you the details, but it used to fall apart quite regularly. And it wasn't a problem. I was a student. I was cool sleeping on the floor. Thought it was funky. Thought I was Withnell. My children haven't got a bed? That's a different story altogether. And remember, it's 440,000 sleeping on the floor. It's 700,000 estimated to be sharing a bed. So you haven't even got, I don't want to use the word privacy. What's the word I want? You haven't even got solitude when you go to bed at night. I read a poem when I was a kid. I don't know if this ever happens to you. Sometimes a line gets into your head in a way that you know it's never going to be removed. And it wasn't Kipling or Pam Ayres or one of the greats. I don't even know who wrote it, but the snuggly bits where the pillow fits. It was a poem about sleep. It was a poem about bedtime. And that still resonates with me because you're in your own space, you're in your own head, you're reflecting on the day. I used to do an audit as I got older. A little audit in my head of things that have gone well or things that have gone badly. And then when I got older still, it would be things I've got to do, essays I've got to write. And when, of course, I went away to boarding school, I took that line with me, the snuggly bits where the pillow fits. And even at boarding school, where you've got 40-odd snoring, grunting fellow pupils lying in some cases, 2 feet away from you. They're not lying in your actual bed. You've still got the snuggly bits where the pillow fits. But not if you've got your brother's feet next to you. You haven't. You haven't even got the snuggly bits where the pillow fits. What's that like? 0345 6060 973. And I believe it can happen very easily to people. I believe that a turn of the dice, a spin of the wheel, the fickle finger of fate, illness, unemployment, I believe it can happen to anybody. So I don't want any shame or embarrassment attached to this conversation. I want you to tell me why your children are sharing a bed with you or their siblings, why they're sleeping on the floor, and how it makes you feel. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And if you want, we can have a little look at the question of why we are all, you included, more comfortable talking about the school fees story than we are talking about this. 0345 6060 973. It is 22 minutes after 11, and I don't actually understand why it's confusing or, quotes, controversial, end quotes. I really don't. You can run out of money. How hard can it be to conceive of running out of money? You've got there's no one you can ring. You've already borrowed off you. You've got no money left. 3 days until any money comes in. You've got no money. And when the money comes in, it's all gone already on bills and food and essentials and necessaries. So if you need something big and unexpected and non-regular, like a bed, it's just not doable. Why is that so hard for people to understand? Especially when there are over 1 million children in the country who are without their own bed. I don't get it. Is it denial? Is it self-preservation? I don't want to think about it because then I'd recognise my own vulnerability. So I'd rather pretend that doesn't exist. If I pretend that condition doesn't exist, then my deep-rooted existential fears that I might one day end up in that condition will somehow be assuaged. I don't know. Gary's in Maidenhead. Gary, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, morning to you, James. We spoke before. I'm the old chap that sleeps in the car.
Okay. How are you getting on?
Well, I'm still here.
Well done.
But, I mean, in the last year that things happened to me, I've seen so much stuff. But I normally go to the food bank on a Thursday. And anyway, I gave this, because it went too far away, and the children didn't look particular like they had a lot of energy.
Yes, well, they wouldn't, would they? I mean, it's a circle of, I say deprivation, but because it sounds like such an ugly word, but that's what it is.
You're right there. But anyway, I went. I mean, this lady invited me in, just for a cup of tea. But I don't know all the circumstances. But her husband died, and she got evicted from her last place. But the actual kiddies, they're sleeping on a mattress, which is on pallets on the floor. There's no carpet. She's got, there's nothing there. I mean,
What's changed there? Because you would once have got a grant, wouldn't you? I'm going back 30 years when I had some knowledge of the system. You could get some sort of grant for an absolute essentials if you were moving into a new place, but then eligibility becomes an issue then, doesn't it? And not everyone's going to be eligible.
Well,
especially if it's not permanent accommodation, you're not going to be eligible.
I mean, there are some of these places, furniture with people in needs, and I said I know of one place, and I'm going to pop round there later just to see how things are. But initially, like I say, and then you've got Richie that you were talking about. That, the difference now it has gone way too far.
Well, it's the conversation, isn't it? I'm trying to explain, or at least to work out there why, it's even listening to you, Gary, and not being able to do anything to help you, that there is a temptation to turn off. Do you know what I mean? It's that kind of, if I pretend you're not there, then I don't need to worry about the things that you're describing to me.
Well, I mean, in some ways, I'm glad what's happened to me has happened, because 10 years ago, I would have done exactly what you've just said. But now that I've seen, a bit like taking the red tablet in the Matrix, I actually see what's going on. I just wish I could win the lottery to help the people that I know of that are more worse off than me.
And of course that reminds us that the point I was trying to make somewhat clumsily a moment ago about the number of people who use food banks also, or later when they're on better circumstances, become volunteers in food banks, certainly become donors, is I think you've just nailed the essence of that process in a way that I failed to do. Thank you, Gary. And I mean that there it is, just the commonplace nature of a mattress on the floor or raised on pallets. That'd be to avoid getting damp. I mean, how can it be normal in modern Britain? I see Andrew Neil today tweeting about growth as if we should be celebrating, or you've got claims that we're the 5th largest economy in the country. You can see why people would rather not talk about the fact that there are 1 million children in the UK either sleeping on the floor or sharing a bed with parents or siblings. But, I mean, even if you want to avoid the detail that Gary's just shared with us, you could ask the question, why? And how have we ended up with a Prime Minister claiming that Keir Starmer is waging class war by talking about private schools? It's quite bizarre, isn't it? I'm increasingly persuaded we're not a normal country at the moment. Betty's in Newham. Betty, what made you pick up the phone?
Yeah, I think the conversation directly, I've always been wanting to talk about it more. I think this is the right platform to say something where someone can hear, or they can hear you clearly, because I've been in a one-bedroom with my 5 children. My son is almost 18, sitting his A-levels. He's going to sit his A-levels. My daughter, 16, 14, 5-year-old and 4-year-old. And, definitely it's all about bedding. You bed. But all the time we've slept in this one bedroom. It's full of damp, condensation, infested with bed bugs, everything. So I've been sharing the bed, but the impact is caused to the children, to where they are now, the teenagers. They can't even have friends around, family, because they will be bullied. They say they will be embarrassed. They go to school tired. They sleep in. They're always getting detention. And I keep talking to the teachers and everything. They kind of like, but nothing. It's like you failed as a parent. You do whatever you do, but the system fails you. I've written to everyone, the MP and everything, at least to get an extra room for my son, because privacy has also become an issue.
Of course it has.
And
how do you explain it to them, Betty? How do you explain it to them?
Do you know, I've really reached the point that I don't seem no one can understand, listen, or I don't know whether the policies are done around people whom they reach to, but people like us who can't be reached to, the real people who really experience these issues.
Well, you're out of sight, out of mind, really.
Exactly. And are we really in Britain? Because one time the children went to visit their grandparents and say, Mom, they're living better than us. That's way in Africa. Do you know? So they're losing hope. They're seeing they're in Britain, but the place they're in, it's like, we came here to look for green pasture, for them to get better life, better.
Yes.
This is a few, but their childhood experience is really having knock effect on them, mentally, physically, and they're thinking twice